Hey everybody, welcome back. I'm the Strategy Professor, and today we're going to be looking at the 9.4 support tier list. So be sure to check out the patch notes video as well. I'll go ahead and leave a link here if you want to click on that. It'll be on the main channel as well. And then I'm also going to do a tier list for AD carry, mid lane, and maybe jungle on this patch as well. I'll see how much I can get done over the next couple of days. So be sure to check all of that content out. I just really quickly want to talk about a couple of the major changes they made in the patch notes. So it's not going to be as detailed as the patch notes video, but I wanted to clarify a couple of things now that the patch is out. Now that I've got to test some things on the PvE, I've done a little bit of research. Because Conqueror is very, very confusing the way that it's worded and the way that it actually works. So if you look at the wording here, and I talked about this in my patch notes video, and most of the stuff that I was talking about was really looking heavily into this right here, deal damage, okay, in the patch notes. And the way that it's phrased, that is not how it actually works. It is spell hit is what they mean. So whenever you hit somebody with a spell, whether it's multiple hit, single hit, damage over time, causes, different kinds of hits, it has to target the enemy, and it has to hit an enemy, and it gives you one stack. So if you use an ability that hits like 5 people, gives you 1 stack. And the on-hit stuff that I was talking so much about in the video does not actually trigger it. So, Draven empowering his Q does not trigger it. Vayne, like, tumbling and auto-attacking, that's only 1. That's not 2, even though that bonus damage is a separate effect that's part of an ability. So the confusing part about that is there are other runes out there, like Ravenous Hunter, which have a similar wording. Heal for so much of the damage dealt by your abilities. Okay, and so this does trigger off of Vayne, tumble damage on her Q. This does trigger off of, Draven's extra damage he does on his Q. So that's what's very confusing about this, and it doesn't even work the same way as Black Cleaver, which also says whenever you deal physical damage, it applies this Cleaver debuff. Because that interaction works with Ashe, where all of her little flurry shards actually apply Black Cleaver even though they don't apply on hit. The same is true of Graves. All of his buckshot applies, Black Cleaver, but it does not apply this rune, Conquer. So Ashe does not apply Conquer either, or on hit. However, for some reason, Urgot does. So Urgot's shots off of his W do apply hits off of this, just like they apply hits off of Cleaver, but they do not apply on hit, like Blade of the Ruined King, for example. And so that's what makes this rune very confusing, is there are some interactions, and there are probably some hidden interactions that people will figure out, but it's just spaghetti code. Like, it's not worded very well, and the way that it interacts in the game is very poorly understood, I think. I was reading it, I had not tested it out, but that's how it was worded, and I was just basing it on, well, what are similar things that are worded in a similar way that exist in the game, like Ravenous Hunter and Black Cleaver. It doesn't really work like those, though. So Urgot seems to be the only major exception I could find in someone that can proc this at a reasonable rate. Everybody else, it basically sucks, is the moral of the story. Because it takes too long to get going. If you have to actually hit enemy champions 5 times with spells and auto attacks to get this to work, it's way, way, way too slow. The fight's almost going to be over by the time you get anything stacked up on it. So I think that's going to make it absolutely terrible for champions that don't have these sort of preferable interactions, and that's basically every champion, with the exception of Urgot that I've seen so far. So there might be some users where there's like nothing else they could possibly get that will have to get this, but I think that most people are going to switch over to press the attack instead. So if they have any way at all to get to use press the attack, they're going to do it. So someone like Yasuo is going to switch over to press the attack, probably. Jax will likely switch over to press the attack. These are for people that, are going to have auto attack resets or other things that can trigger press the attack quickly. So like Jax can do it, Camille can do it. Irelia can't really do that. Trendamir, I don't believe, has an auto attack reset, although I'm not 100% about that. Someone like Renekton can trigger it off of his W. The Conquer. Now, Renekton's W might also, or not Conquer, but press the attack. It might trigger Conquer as well faster. I'm not sure. I didn't test Renekton, but by and large, most champions will either switch off of the Conquer rune or they're going to switch over to press the attack. And so that's going to be a huge hit to a lot of the champions in the top lane. And the main goal here is it's going to take a lot of true damage out of the game, and it could potentially bring tanks back. Now, keep in mind, there are just natural tank busters that are still going to be relevant, that are still going to be powerful. So, like Fiora and Camille still break tanks really quickly, even without Conquer in the top lane, especially when they get fed in its late game. Someone like Jax is still going to scale through them when he gets super powerful. So there still will be answers to tanks in the top lane, but unequivocally, tanks will be stronger. They will have a much larger window where they can still hang with the scalers. So now maybe they don't get outscaled at 2 items. Maybe it takes 3 or even 4 items to start outscaling them. So that buys you a lot more time in the game where you can hold up against a split push and then teleport in and have a much more impactful team fight. Because a lot of the Conqueror users aren't that great in team fights. Most of them. There are some that can be, but most of them are split pushers. And most of the tanks that could potentially be played top lane, like Shen, like Maokai, are going to be good at team fights. So that's historically kind of the tension, is that, you know, when you're playing the tank, your team needs to be able to start a fight and engage and have these team fights quickly into the game, relatively quickly. You know, they need to do it in the mid game before the split pusher gets to, like, whatever their threshold on items is to beat the tank in the split push. Because, you know, even after this nerf, if Tryndamere, you know, gets to 4 or 5 items, he's still going to run through that Maokai in a split push most of the time, right? And so you need to be able to force those team fights, force Tryndamere to come down to help by teleporting to the team fights as Maokai or something. So, you know, it just gives a little bit more leeway. You have a little bit more time to make that happen. So I think this is a much healthier interaction rather than completely squeezing tanks out of the lane and forcing this, like, clown fiesta that's been going on for, like, 8 months or something now. It might actually be possible to have a team fight comp without totally being troll and without totally just completely abandoning your top lane to split push. So some of the biggest nerfs are going to be Yasuo, Draven, Yorick, Irelia, Tryndamere, Kled, and Riven. I think these don't very easily translate into other runes. Like I said, Yasuo can take PTA, press the attack. It's not going to be as good. It'll be okay. Yorick's going to have a harder time with it, although he does have an auto attack reset off of his Q, so I think he can still trigger PTA. But a major thing about PTA is that it's not true damage, it's adaptive damage. So it does burst damage up front when you trigger press the attack, which is, you know, physical damage. I believe it's physical or magic damage. And then the extra damage that you get is 12% of damage dealt. So that's either going to be physical or magic damage. Okay, so none of that is true damage. That's the main takeaway. PTA, not true damage. It's burst damage, which I believe is adaptive, right? Yeah, it's adaptive damage, so it could be either or. And then it's somewhere between 8 to 12% of the damage based on level. So it's not even 12% necessarily. It could start at 8. When does it change? Yeah, so it stays under 12 for quite a long time. So, like, in the mid-game, it'll be, like, 10% extra damage. Now, everybody does that extra damage, so it's you know, arguably, potentially even better in team fights in 5-on-5 situation. If you trigger PTA on somebody on the tank, then everybody gets, you know, 10% extra damage on them. That's really good. That's up to 50% damage in a team fight, right? But in the split push situations, in the one-on-one situations, it's a lot less than Conquer. Conquer gives you a lot of AD, which gives you nice sustain damage, you know, scales off of your abilities. And that 20% true damage conversion is much, much more than 10% total damage. It's not exactly the same math, but it's basically 20% more damage. Is often what it'll come down to, and potentially even more against, like, hard tanks. So I think that ultimately this is going to shift the meta more towards team fighting and a little bit away from split pushing, although I think that split pushers will still be good. So what does this mean? This means that teamfight supports are back, baby. They've been coming back for a while, but they're going to be even stronger now. So that is code word enchanters. Okay, so enchanters are going to get even stronger on this patch because damage is getting removed from the game. This is going to create a space for more tanks to potentially start slipping in to the top lane. And this means that champions that are very good at team fighting, that are kind of bad at skirmishing, like Soraka, Sona, Janna, these champions will all get a little bit better. Okay, so the biggest winners, and most of these are from top lane, I think Silas is going to be a huge winner because he could get pushed out and kind of bullied out early, I believe. I'm not 100% about his interactions, but I know that he didn't use Conquer 100%. So basically, like, pretty much it's a buff for everyone in the game that doesn't use Conquer, if you want to think of it that way. Conquer was a very oppressive rune, you know, against most champions in most matchups. So everyone that doesn't use Conquer is getting a buff. But I think Silas in particular, just because he has so much utility later on, he can actually split push and fight people if he gets, you know, fed enough. But he also has really good team fight potential because he can steal team fight ults. So I think people are starting to learn to use Silas a little bit better. People are starting to use kind of a tank build on Silas a little bit more. They're using things like Grasp of the Undying top lane with stuff like Spirit Visage or Abyssal Mask in some circumstances. So a lot of people, I believe, are starting to kind of tank him out. And so he's becoming like a pseudo tank that has good utility and puts out pretty respectable damage and has some pretty disgusting healing in his kit. And so I think this is one of the better interactions here. So Grasp users are definitely going to start coming back into the fold a little bit more. This still has him going like full damage, but the ones that I've seen that are really successful end up getting like tanky-ish sort of stuff. He does have good AP ratios, but if you're maxing Kingslayer, which I think is what most people are going to do, then having more sort of resistances makes your health, your effective health, bigger. The same concept of as enchanters, right? The more resistances that you have, the more armor and magic resist that you have, the more valuable heals and shields become on you, because it takes more damage to cut through it. So I think if you're maxing Kingslayer, which is what a lot of people are going to start doing in the top lane, yeah, this is closer to the thing that I've been seeing more people do. Rod is another one that is kind of been cropping up more. I like the idea of Rod, especially in the mid lane, because it gives you that health that you really want, but it also gives you the AP. It does take time to store up, so you know you got to think carefully about that. But something like this, where it's a hybrid build, where you're either getting Iceborne Gauntlet, which almost always seems like it gets abused on these champions that want to go tank but aren't really like supposed to be tanks. And then Spirit Visage obviously is massive for the extra healing you can get off of it. So I think that something like Aftershock or Grasp is probably best on him. But we'll see. I mean, you can go sort of the Proto Belt. That type of build also can potentially be really good. But I think that this tank type of build will be even better, especially once Conqueror gets knocked out of the picture a little bit. Right, so once that armor actually has value and doesn't get 20% of it shredded by Conqueror all the time, then I think it's going to be a lot stronger. So I think he has good matchups. He is flexible. As you can see, there's not really a consensus on the rune. It seems like every other person is using a different rune. But I personally think that either something like Aftershock or Grasp is going to be better, probably depending on your matchup. Maybe Grasp against tanks, Aftershock against other champs. But this isn't a Silas video, so I don't want to go too long about Silas. But I just wanted to mention why I think he's going to be a major person. Sion, obvious winner. He's good right now. He was even good with Conquer in the top lane. He's going to get way better. I know he did get nerfed in 9.3, but I still think that he's strong, and the nerf is going to be a huge boon to him. Vlad is another one. Now, Vlad doesn't build a lot of armor, but he wants less damage in the game overall so that he can just scale up to 9 and then just go haywire on people. So now his matchup against tanks might be a little suspicious, you know, tanks that can heal especially, and that allows him to get Spirit Visage. So things like Dr. Mundo, Silas, I think other type of just healer tanks in the top lane could potentially be a problem for him. I'm not sure. Because if they end up getting, you know, if Malachi gets Spirit Visage and Adaptive Helm, I'm not sure if you're ever going to kill him if you're Vladimir. But I still think that Vlad is pretty good nevertheless, although, you know, my understanding of him and his place in a tank meta is tenuous, right? I'm not 100% about that, but I still think he's going to be good. Shin is an obvious one. I think whenever you hear of tanks coming back, Shin is a big one top lane. Shin also has a pretty decent win rate overall, so that's going to apply more macro pressure around the map. Shin is great, too, because he can duel people when he's, like, decent in the meta. He puts out pretty respectable damage. He's very difficult to kill. He does have a repeatable shield, which is very strong, and he applies a lot of macro pressure. So he's one of the few tanks that can split push very well, and he can show up in team fight very well. So I would not be surprised to start seeing Shin more in professional play off of this patch. And even in solo queue, I think he'll be potentially a lot stronger. So when tanks start coming back, Shin is almost always one of the front runners for that. Now, I'm not sure the rune. It'll probably just be like Grasp, I would imagine. But, yeah, we could definitely... I think it's almost certain that Shin will start coming back at higher elos, and that might filter back down to lower elos. And Maokai is the other one. I have Sion on here twice. Maokai is the other one that I think has a lot of potential in the top lane because he has a ton of CC. He can put out a lot of magic damage in team fights, which is still very valuable because a lot of junglers are still going to be AD. So having that extra AP damage can be very helpful. Has a lot of healing, has a lot of synergy with different items out there, such as Spirit Visage. So I wouldn't be surprised to see a little more Maokai in there, potentially, as a top laner. I don't think he's as certain as something like Sion and Shin, but I think that he nevertheless could be a really good candidate for top lane because he's so good at team fighting. He's one of the kings of team fighting. And then Nunu, he's already taken over the jungle. He's very strong in the jungle. I think this is going to make him even stronger. You know, all of his tank items are going to get a lot more value when very few people are going to be running Conqueror. Lally is another one top lane that's interesting. She really didn't use Conqueror that much. She would prefer to use Kleptomancy so that she can gain a lot of extra gold off the Klepto procs. And she's pretty good against other melee champs because it makes it very hard for them to avoid her tentacles and her all-in. And so I think that she could be a rising star because she's very good against those type of things. Now, I don't think she's going to get picked all the time in pro. I think she's too vulnerable to ganks for that. But I think that she is a very good lane bully and one of the few lane bullies that is not heavily affected by the Conqueror nerf. So Illaoi might gain a little bit of ground here. And then Fiora and Camille, just because they are still very good at breaking tanks. So if we start seeing things like Shin and Maokai cropping up a little bit more, then I think Fiora and Camille can be played into that pretty well. Camille can take press the attack and still be very effective. And then Fiora, I'm not really sure. I guess she'll probably go Grasp or Klepto. But I think that she has potential there too. And then Dr. Mundo is another person you immediately start thinking about tanks. You start thinking about Dr. Mundo coming back in. You know, just stacks up a ton of health, runs around, very difficult to kill. If you don't have enough damage to get through him, you're not getting through him. So he could serve as an excellent, you know, front line for some of these champions like Jinx in a team fight or like Vayne in a team fight. Vayne top could become a little bit more valuable as well if we see less fighters. I think that she is a pretty decent pick, particularly if you go like this Klepto Vayne build top lane against tanks that are immobile. So if you pick her into something like Shin or Maokai or Sion, could be decent. I'm not saying necessarily to do it all the time, but I think that it's something that people are becoming a little more open to now that champions like, you know, for a long time, Gnar and Victor and some of these other like ranged harass champions have been kind of nerfed out. And she does scale very well to take on tanks later on in the game. So I think Vayne's going to gain a lot of real estate on this patch. And you also neutralize some of her weaknesses, which are that she doesn't put out a lot of burst damage early and that she's relatively short range. You can negate a lot of that by running her top lane. So I think that's something that people are starting to take a bit more seriously, even though at first it was pretty troll. Now that tanks are coming back, it could be even better. She doesn't have to face the prospect of a Riven or, you know, Tryndamere top lane, and that'll be helpful. And then Jax, as ironic as that seems because he was such a good Conqueror user, he already used press the attack in the jungle, and he can trigger it very easily. And so the fact that he's going to be getting a lot less pressure from some of these early game, or not necessarily early game, but just like high damage champions like Yasuo, like Riven, Kled, Tryndamere, Irelia, the fact that he's going to have an easier laning phase potentially against tanks, he might get a free pass. And so I think that'll help him out a lot. He's already going to do enough damage to kill tanks later on in the game, especially with press the attack and just, you know, all of the high damage builds that he's getting with like Trinity Force plus Shojin and that type of stuff. I think he'll be really strong. Okay, so anyways, let's talk about let's talk about the actual support tier, since this is a support tier list. I'll have that timestamp so you can, you know, skip that. I guess if you're already listening to this part, then you didn't skip it. But I just wanted to set the stage there for why I think enchanters are going to be really strong on this patch. A lot of other tier lists don't really talk much about the meta, or it's just like kind of vague or patch notes. But I think that that informs why enchanters are strong, and I still think they're very heavily undervalued on most tier lists. Some people are starting to wake up to Nami and maybe Sona, maybe Soraka. Like, they're sprinkling in a couple of them every now and then, but they're not really painting the big picture, I think, for people about why these champions are creeping up. So I think it's just going to come out of nowhere, and people will be like, oh my god, enchanters, wow, why are they so good? It's like, well, if you've been paying attention over the last 6 patches or so, they've been inching up in power, you know, over and over and over as damage starts moving out of the game. I talked about that more last tier list. I'm not going to reiterate that again. Go, you know, watch the beginning of the last tier list if you want. But, I mean, the basic thing is it's a lot of damage has moved out of the game, and they rebuffed Forbidden Idol. So, anyways, let's go ahead and get in here. So, first up, I think, is Nami on this patch. Now, Nami is somebody that I still had as tier 1 last time, and I think I had her as rank 3. And she's moved up in my mind because Jinx has moved up. That's the biggest thing, is that I don't think Sona provides enough peel for Jinx, because Jinx doesn't have escapes on this patch. And I think Jinx is going to keep going, and that was someone that, you know, I absolutely got right. A lot of other people were sleeping on Jinx, but she was one of the biggest beneficiaries of the last patch, and I talked about that a lot in my 80 carry tier list from last patch if you watch it. But it's just her specific interactions with Hurricane and Infinity Edge are very, very powerful. I think that Ashe is another one who is starting to creep up a bit in priority. Now, she doesn't have that interaction with Conqueror that I was hoping that she would, but she is moving up a little bit because she is really strong with Infinity Edge. People are starting to figure out, oh, I can rush Infinity Edge, and so that garbage Blade Runner and King build on her. It's not, I mean, it's good in pro play with lots of team fights. There will be more team fights on this patch. I still think Infinity Edge is the way to go on her. So I just released an Ashe guide last week, so be sure to check that out if you are trying to understand why would you rush Infinity Edge on her. The TLDR is it gives her 50% extra damage as a single item power spike. So that's how important it is. But yeah, just the Infinity Edge into Hurricane, and they did just buff Essence Reaver on this patch as well. And so I think that will be sort of a really, really strong build on her, is Infinity, Hurricane, Essence Reaver over time. And so the reason I mention Ashe is that she is like Jinx, where she's immobile, but she can be very powerful if she's allowed to stand there and do her thing. Twitch is another one who's very strong on this patch. Same deal, immobile, but powerful and allowed to do his thing. And I think these champions are going to power up a little bit more as well, because Draven is getting a pretty huge hit by not taking Conquer. I'm not entirely sure what he's going to get now. I don't know. I'll have to think about that for the 80 carry tier list, but he really doesn't have a rune that's going to substitute easily for Conquer. That was something that was uniquely, like, pretty borderline overpowered on Draven, and doesn't have a very simple replacement. So we'll have to think, because he's not really like attack speed, you know. He really wants to hit somebody hard on the first couple of hits. I mean, maybe Dark Harvest or something on Draven. I mean, that's the best guess off the top of my head, is it might be Dark Harvest Draven. Or, I mean, I guess it could be something like Klepto Draven. When you activate your axe and then throw it, I believe that would give you a Klepto proc. So you might be able to get a Klepto proc or two with Draven. So I'm not sure. I'll have to study it, and I'll have to see. Well, let me... What are pros trying Draven on this patch yet? Let me see. Yeah, they just didn't read the patch notes, I guess. I don't know. They're still running Conquer. I think it's awful. Maybe this hasn't, like... Maybe this is delayed and they didn't do it after the changes. Or maybe they're just testing it out to see how bad it feels. I don't know. He is winning a lot. I just feel like Conquer is awful on him after the change, but I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but... Anyways, I think we'll be seeing a little bit less Draven, or if we do see Draven, he'll be weaker. So that means that champions that are weaker in the laning phase, potentially, that could get bullied out by Draven. Champions like Vayne, champions like Twitch, are going to be a bit stronger now. Now, Vayne is mobile, but, like, Twitch is not, Ashe is not, and Jinx is not. So I just think you need more peel. Like, that's why Nami, you know, has gone up a little bit in my eyes, is that she has very good harassment early on in the laning phase, so she applies a ton of pressure. She scales pretty well with plus healing and shielding, and particularly Athene's Unholy Grail. You get a lot of extra bounces in there. AP is, you know, gives you double power because it has an AP ratio, and it reduces the amount of fall off per bounce. So increases the amount of damage you do per bounce in addition to per hit off of this. So it has a lot of, like, really powerful interactions with AP. And you know what gives a lot of AP? Athene's Unholy Grail. Athene's plus Frostfang plus Redemption ends up giving you 300%. Pull out the calculator here. Ends up giving you 300% mana regen, which is good in and of itself, but then you get an extra 5 AP per 25 mana regen. So that's going to give you 25 per... Yeah, 5 per 25. Yeah, so that's 20 per 100. And so you're going to end up getting an extra 60 AP off of that. Because you're going to have 300% mana regen. So that means that when you look at an item like Athene's Unholy Grail, this is a 90 AP item, effectively, when you combine it with Redemption, right? So 90 AP. So any champion that scales really hard with AP, which Nami does, this is your ticket here. That is a very, very powerful stat. So if you look at just the AP value on that, 90... times 21.75. You know, that right there almost covers the entire cost of the item. That's like 1957 gold worth of value. It's only a 2100 gold item. So for this passive, for the mana regeneration itself, for the magic resist, the cooldown reduction, you're only paying, you know, like 150 gold for all of that. Now that's what I call value. And it does the math here for you as well. You know, the thing in and of itself is 114% efficient, and then it's an extra 5% efficient for each additional 25% mana regen that you get. So that's discounting the 100% here. So you're going to get 200% mana regen that's not calculated in that. So that times 8 is going to be 40. So it's 154% efficient, not including the passive, which I've calculated that up in past videos. It's really difficult to calculate, but it is an extreme amount of extra healing off of somebody like Nami. If you think of like plus healing and shielding, I believe is budgeted at, it's like 37 gold per 1%. And, you know, after you cast a wave, you're probably going to be healing for... It's 35% of how... Well, we can just look at it real quick. It's 35% of how much the wave deals. So, in damage. So, if you cast it on the enemy and then it bounces around, it is going to be reduced by like 15%. Or whatever. Let's just say, just for easy math, you land like one auto attack for somewhere around 60 damage. And then this ends up being something like 290 damage. That's going to be 350 damage, and you're getting 35% of that. You're getting 122 healing. So, how much is 122 healing in terms of plus healing and shielding? Well, it's a lot, because look at, like, the max healing on this is like 160 off of one bounce on this, so it is difficult to calculate, but that's like over 100%, or it's not 100%, but it's pretty close. Let me see, divided by 160, it's like 76% plus healing and shielding. So that would be like a 2,800 gold value in that small scenario there. Now, obviously, it's not super scientific, because you could get double bounces off of this. You could do even more damage if you get like a triple bubble and then, you know, hit them with a tidal wave and then bounce around a bunch of this stuff. You get even more healing off of Athene's Unholy Grail. But that's just like a taste of it, right? So a lot of times it's going to give you you know, well north of an additional 30% healing and shielding on your abilities off of Athene's Unholy Grail on champions that do respectable damage in addition to healing. So something like Nami, something like Sona, something like Karma, Lulu, all of these. And so even if you average just like 30 plus healing and shielding times like the 37 gold value, I think is what it is, that's still an extra 1,000, you know, whatever gold plus, you know, whatever that number was before. It just ends up being like over 200% efficient. So it's a super, super effective item. It's very good on Nami. She applies pressure early. She has great peeling between her bubble, her wave, her ability to speed people up and slow people down, including herself, on all of her abilities. Relatively short cooldown on her ult. The ability to run people down as well. So this is very good on champions like Vayne, because it allows them to stick so easily to other people. It has great ranges too. This is one thing that a lot of people underestimate about Nami, but she can stand very, very far back and be really effective. So like you can throw this wave on somebody at 725 range and it can bounce around the entire team fight. So you can throw this wave in theory, bounce it off of somebody and go hit the enemy as well for that last little bit of damage if they're out of range. So that's like, you know, 1400 range, you can pop somebody, you know, with this wave or have it bounce around and heal your whole team up. So, and this has 800 range, so you can speed people up with this, you know, give them the ability to lock people down. So just the ranges, how these bounces work, just allow her to be much safer. So she can play much further back from someone like Sona or Soraka in fights. So she's a lot less likely to take collateral damage from AoE, to get caught up in, you know, a lot of the CC in these fights, to get hit by like Malachi ults or Sejuani or Nunu ults or all of this stuff. She can stand so far back. And the fact that she has a couple of different forms of CC allow her to lock down, you know, high threat damage champions like Katarina, or to, you know, stop, you know, different champions from channeling their abilities. And the long range of this wave makes her particularly good against champions like Xerath or like Jhin, because she can throw it from really far away and knock them out of it. So she's just got a lot of corner cases where she can be very strong, and she's just a good generalist pick as well. So she still is going to be fairly weak to assassins if they have assassins in there. She does not have a very good build path to get armor. She can get Ninja Tabby, but that's about it. You really don't want to get other armor items on her if at all possible. So Zed is getting buffed on this patch. You know, Hecarim is getting buffed on this patch. So we're probably going to see a lot more Zed and Hecarim. So, you know, they might be able to run her over. So that's going to make it difficult to itemize with her, because you really want... You can't, once you get to Athene's plus Redemption, though, you might be able to heal through all of that, plus Revitalize. But it's going to be tough. So you're going to have to stand really far back. You do have the option of taking something like Barrier. I've talked about that before on the last patch. You can take that against, you know, those types of threats if you don't think you're going to have kill pressure. The thing with Nami is you almost always potentially have kill pressure in lane with your bubble. So it's really hard not to take Ignite as Nami in the laning phase, but... You do have that option if you're very scared of the Hecarim or the Zed or whatever. You could take Barrier, potentially. But yeah, I think she's going to be very strong. Just run with Airy, Mana Flow Ban, Absolute Focus, Water Walking, and then just Bone Plating and Revitalize. And then Mobility Boots most of the time. If they have an Assassin that's fed, you can get a defensive boot. Frostfang, and then I've been moving away from Ardent as much lately. Ardent is very good, but Athene's plus Redemption is just so much extra AP. It's disgusting, particularly if your AD carry's not doing so hot. And if you need more defense, Athene's and Redemption give you that. So Athene's actually has magic resist on it. Redemption has HP on it. And both of those synergize so well to give you so much extra AP, which means that you're going to be healing for a lot more with your W. So Ardent is still very good, particularly if you have a Hurricane user, because each one of those bolts off of Hurricane triggers Ardent Sensor. But, you know, if your AD carry's not doing so hot and you're trying to play around your mid lane or your jungler, then Athene's could be the place to go. Okay, so Nami's still going to be very strong right now. I just moved her up a little bit just because some of the best AD carries right now, the Ashe, the Jinx, the Twitch, all need a little bit more peel than I think Sona provides. However, Sona is still super strong, and there is going to be more team fighting going on this patch, I think. I think people will maybe try to bring in tanks. You got to keep in mind also that a lot of players really don't like playing tanks A lot of people don't think you can hard carry with tanks in solo queue, and to some extent, I agree with that. At lower elos, I think that it's very tough. You don't see a lot of people one-tricking, Malachi or Shin, on those, 100 games from unranked to challenger. They're not going to be playing that top lane, right? They're going to be playing things like Yasuo or Riven, or things like that. So tanks just aren't as sexy to play, but we still might see them. They still might be a bit more effective. If pro players start playing them a lot more in the top lane, it'll probably trickle down into solo queue. But either way, even if people don't play tanks, the Conqueror users, if they're trying to force them, are still going to do a lot less damage overall. So that's a great environment for Sona. So Sona is kind of the stat queen. She's going to outscale any other enchanter in a team fight. And it's just not even particularly close because, her auras just put out so much power. I did all the math in the last video, so I'm not going to reiterate all of that. Go check out the Sona thing from the last video. But I will just say that her W, effectively ends up with just 1 or 2 items, giving you over 1,000 effective health on, a 3 or 4 second cooldown in the mid to late game. So if you get this off twice in a team fight and you touch multiple targets, it's pretty much over. It's going to be very, very difficult for the enemy if, you start the redemption, you're dropping the redemption in, and then you use this Aria Perseverance, shield and heal everybody, and then, power cord, their biggest threat, to knock off 30% of the damage. It's going to be very, very difficult for them to burst through that. And if they don't burst you, if you get off 2 rotations of W, it's over. So if the fight goes for, 5 seconds or so, you're probably going to win the fight if somebody doesn't get blown up instantly. She has a nice AoE teamfight ability, which for some reason I can never hit on stream, but it should, in theory, be relatively easy to hit. It's 900 range, got a pretty large hitbox. It does have a little bit of a delay on it, so you kind of have to get used to that. It's a little weird, but overall, it should be something pretty easy to hit. And she's got good harassment during the laning phase. You can use the Hymn of Valor. It buffs up you. It buffs up your ally. I mean, if you Hymn of Valor somebody and hit them with that power cord, a lot of times against a squishy target, it's going to do almost half of their health, at level 1 or level 2. It does a lot of damage. And it's very easy for her to stack Spell Thieves too. So even if it's super dangerous for you to walk up for the auto, still has 825 range on the Q portion of it, which still allows you to apply Airy, allows you to apply Scorch, and allows you to stack your Spell Thieves and apply the damage off of Spell Thieves. So it does add up. It is pretty decent. So yeah, I think she's going to be very strong. Just the issue, once again, she's basically made of paper. She's about as squishy as you can possibly get. She has 482 base health, almost no health regen, and 325 base movement speed. Now, she can speed herself up with her E, but it is on a fairly long cooldown. You're not going to put points in this, so it's going to be 12-second cooldown for a long time. So it can be useful, but she also has to get a lot closer. Just keep in mind that these auras are only 400 radius. So that means you have to walk up, not quite in a melee combat, but pretty close to touch people, with your W and with your Q. And so that means that you could potentially get focused out by some high burst champions on the enemy team. You could get hit by collateral AoE damage. You could get caught up in a CC chain. So it does make her a little bit more vulnerable. However, the scaling with Ardent Censer and Athenes is through the roof because each person who you give a shield to, that triggers Ardent Censer. Each one of her auras triggers Airy. Each one of them, because it triggers Airy, is also going to trigger Athenes. So even if you use your Q to your W's on cooldown for another 3 seconds after you do it, let's say you use your Q to deal some damage to people. If you walk over and touch somebody with that aura after you've done that damage, it will trigger Airy on them, and that will in turn trigger Athene's healing on them. So Athene's just has you almost instantly use those stacks, so you're not going to go over the limit. You're going to distribute it very quickly to your allies. You're going to get tons of Airy procs. Remember, every time Airy goes off in the mid game, it's going to be a 50 or 60 shield that's also modified by plus healing and shielding, which is also modified by an AP ratio and revitalize. So Airy ends up scaling pretty hard. So it's 50 to 60 on paper, but to someone who's injured, it's probably going to be closer to something like 70 or 80. And if you get that Athene's trigger on them, let's say that you have 100 Athene's charges, it's going to heal them for an extra 100, which is not very difficult to get those kinds of charges because, Power Cord, this thing by itself, Hymn of Valor, when you have this maxed out, is going to be 320 base damage with the 1.0 ratio. So if you have 100 AP, that's 420 damage. You yourself get this bonus, so that's going to give you an extra, 60. So that's almost 500 base, and then the auto attack itself is going to do another 60, and if it's a power chord, it's going to do even more than that. It's going to be doing like another 200. So it's possible, like if you use, Hymn of Valor plus the blue power chord, you could be doing like 600 or 700 damage off of this one ability, and 35% of that is going to move back over to be recycled through Athene's, right? So that's going to give you, somewhere in the neighborhood of like 200 Athene's charges, which is a 200 heal you can put on that Aerie. So you can see pretty quickly, and all of that is going to be buffed by the extra 15% and plus healing and shielding from Revitalize and any plus healing and shielding that you might have. So there's just so many modifiers, so much stuff flying around constantly with Sona, with all of these auras and Aerie, Revitalize, plus healing and shielding, Athene's, Redemption. There's just so many things that just buff up your allies that she's just gonna win team fights. She just wins. I think she has the highest win percentage right now as a support. Yeah, by a large margin. She's almost getting up to like 55% territory. That's like mega overpowered territory. And she's still not picked that much. She's still only picked 5.5% of the time. She's never banned. I mean, this is just like the perfect storm, especially if you're silver and lower. These are stats for plat. At silver and lower, she's probably even stronger, although I don't know. People might just die with her at lower elo, but she's going to be very, very strong. Also, Thresh got nerfed on this patch. So over the last couple of patches, we've seen Zyra nerfs, and we've seen Brand nerfs, and we've seen Ignite nerfs. Now we're seeing Conqueror nerfs, for Draven. So he's, going to be a lot more, if he's not out of the picture, he's going to be a lot weaker. Now Thresh is getting nerfed out. Thresh is historically thought to be very good into enchanters with those hooks. Now he's going to be under a lot more pressure because it's going to cost more mana for those hooks, and he's going to have a longer cooldown, so you can punish him much, much more if he ever misses a hook. So this is all helping out enchanters as well. And so Sona is kind of the queen bee of enchanters. I have played her a lot. I have moved over to Nami just because I think Nami is better with immobile 80 carries, but maybe it's Sona time again, in the sense that if people were picking a lot of tanks on your team, if you have 2 tanks on your team, you can stay alive. Sona's going to be great. So I still think she's going to be fantastic. Just Aerie, Mana Flow Ban, Absolute Focus, Water Walking. You can substitute this out for if you think the game's going to go a bit longer, like if you have kind of a scaling 80 carry, something like a Vayne, an Ezreal, Jinx, something like that, then you can get Gathering Storm. If you have an early pressure 80 carry, something like Misfortune, Jhin, Draven, that type of thing, then you can switch that out for Scorch. And then just Bone Plating and Revitalize is the standard pretty much always. Mobility boots, you can get a defensive boot if you want, and then just Athene's, Ardent, Redemption. You kind of decide which order you want to get those. I think that Athene's is almost always the first item I would rush these days, and the reason is it has 100% mana regen, and it has 30% magic resist. And it just gives you so much extra effective healing that it's gross. And the components are very, very nice. Getting that Chalice of Harmony for the laning phase gives you a lot of extra regeneration, especially against other attrition lanes like other Namis, other Lulus, that type of stuff. So I've been a big, big fan of getting Athene's first on Nami and Sona lately. And it's just very versatile. It's good if your 80 carry is doing well. It's also good if your 80 carry is feeding and you need to play around your mid laner. But the huge one is the 100% mana regen. If you go Ardent first, it's only 50% mana regen, and you will find yourself running out of mana a lot more. And there's no defense on this item. So it has... it's not even more offense, really, than Athene's either. Athene's has a pretty good chunk of AP on it. It has 50 AP base, not including the extra that you're going to get off of Frostfang. And you're going to get 10 extra AP off of the mana regen conversion on Frostfang. So it has 60 AP on it, and I'm pretty sure that's what Ardent Sensor does as well. Yeah, Ardent Sensor has 60 as well. So this has 60 because it has 30. It gains 20 off of itself and then 10 extra off of Frostfang, which you're going to have. So this has 60 as well. So you're not even gaining extra individual damage off of getting Ardent Sensor. Athene's does the same damage. It has more mana regen, has the same cooldown reduction, has magic resist on it. It's just, what do you want for the passive? Do you want the on-hit damage, which is very, very strong, but it gets stronger as the game goes on? Because remember, at early levels, it's only going to give you, if you rush this as a first item, it's only going to give you something like 8 extra on-hit damage and maybe like 15% attack speed, which is very good. But is that worth, you know, trading for like 100 healing every time extra, you know, basically 30 to 40% extra plus healing and shielding on an item? Probably not, right? As a first item. And the mana regen, once again, I can't overstate that, just how important that is on champions like Sona and Nami early on. Someone asked me yesterday, well, what do you think about tier Sona? Is that still good? And I still, you know, I don't think so. I really don't like tier Sona that much anymore. It was a thing back in the day. This was before Athene's got buffed. So Athene's used to only do, I believe it was 25% of pre-mitigation damage before patch 8.12. So it wasn't as good. It was still good, but not as good as it was currently. And then I think people were, back when that was good, people were rushing Redemption plus Locket. I believe that was the meta back when tier was in. And so Locket doesn't have any mana regen on it. And so having the extra mana off of tier could have potentially been very good back then. Also, tier was only 750 gold, and I think it stacked, it like gave you more mana per stack and stacked faster. So it was just a much better item back then. And, you know, those two items, Redemption plus Locket, were so powerful in general, you really didn't need more items after that. It was okay, but you didn't need it, and the extra mana was very valuable. Fast forward to today, you know, tier is 850, stacks slower, gives you less mana, and you're going to be getting more mana regen items. So getting Locket is usually not that great on Sona in the early levels because it's not going to have the mana regen. It's been nerfed a lot, so that you really want to have, like, a lot of levels and a lot of health in your build to make the shield worthwhile. So now the fact that your standard build is going to be Athene's plus Redemption is an insane amount of mana regen. You're going to have 300% mana regen. Just for context, you know, if you are getting like 15 mana per 5, which I think is about what you'll get around level 11, that means you're getting 3 mana per second. If you're getting an extra, if you're getting an extra 300% of that, then you're going to be getting like 12 extra mana per second. Something like that, right? Because you're going to be getting the 300%, which is 9, and then you're going to be getting the 3 base that you have. So that's like 12 mana per second, right? And so if your W is on something like a 4-second cooldown, then it's you're going to be regening 48 mana while it's on cooldown, which basically pays for half of it. So, like, almost all of your spells are basically half off or more. It's not exactly that, but it's not, like, as much raw mana as tier is, but it's a hell of a lot of mana. You know, unless you're just chain casting your spells over and over again for, like, 50 seconds, like, you're not going to run out of mana in a lot of these fights. Especially if you pick up things like your Frostfang, you know, if you choose to upgrade that further, or if you get a an Ardent Censer after that, or if you have a Water Dragon, or just whatever the case is, it should be very rare, unless you're just running around the map spamming all of your spells to run out of mana in fights. It'll happen from time to time, sure, but the problem is if you get tier, you're slowing down the rest of your build by 850 mana a pop, which is a lot. 850 mana is like 40% of the cost of an Athene's Unholy Grail. So you're giving up almost half of an Athene's or half of a Redemption in order to have some mana in a situation where you're already going to have like an exorbitant amount of mana regen with this build. So I really don't like it. It just slows down your build too much. You know, if you're sitting there on tier and like a piece of Athene's Unholy Grail and the opposing Nami or the opposing Soraka has completed Redemption or Athene's or something like that, you are really, really far behind. They are going to destroy you in team fights. So, or if you only have Athene's and a tier, and then they have like a Redemption and an Athene's, then you're going to get smoked in team fights. So, I think you're just giving up too much of your momentum to get tier. Now, at higher brackets, historically, they would get tier because they don't have the resources to get multiple items. A lot of times. So, you know, you're just not going to be able to get 3 or 4 items as, you know, if you were playing something like Sona in Challenger or Sona in like a pro game or something like that. So you might see tier in those circumstances just because they can't afford a lot of items. But in solo queue, you know, when you're gold or silver or platinum or something, there's going to be so many kills circling around that you're going to be able to afford multiple items. You'll find yourself in many games at least getting 2 items, sometimes moving into 3 items. So, anyways, that's how I would build it. Okay, let's move down the list. We'll move a little bit faster here. Soraka, I still think she's going to be strong, but I still like Nami and Sona more. This will be debatable. I know there will be a lot of high-elo people that could potentially play Soraka. Soraka might be one that you see in pro play, potentially if people play enchanters. I would say that Soraka, if we're talking pro play, is more likely to be seen than someone like a Sona. But for just everyday people playing in solo queue, I think Soraka is tougher because, like, you have to have a team. Like, you have to have team fights, 100%. She is awful at small skirmishes. She can get flanked. She's very slow. She only has 325 move speed. You do gain some extra speed if you hit somebody with Star Call. You get to move a little bit faster when you're running away from them, right? You get the, it slows them by 30%. I believe it gives you, 10% bonus movement speed. When you're running away from them, as long as you're not surrounded. So that's useful. You do gain some movement speed when moving towards allies. So you have, like, some conditional stuff. But that's, like, a lot of what Soraka is it's, like, very conditional. You know, are you hitting your Qs? You know, are you maneuvering in the right directions? Now, her ult is very powerful in team fights, and that's kind of like Karthus, where you're not going to miss. And in theory, it is a pretty good counter to Karthus. And Karthus is still going to be very strong in the jungle despite that nerf. So she can be a pretty decent pick into Karthus if people aren't picking, you know, high mobility assassin type of champions. So if people aren't picking Kha'Zix, they aren't picking Zed or Hecarim or whatever, then she can be good. The problem is I think people are still going to pick those kinds of things in the mid lane and in the jungle. So we'll see. It certainly helps that champions like Draven, you know, are falling off a little bit, that Thresh is falling off a little bit. She does have pretty good matchups in theory against things like Nami, Lulu, Karma. Like, she can heal through a lot of their stuff and outscale them. I think Sona's a bit more of a toss-up. I think that Sona can hang with Soraka in late-game healing over long periods of time. And, you know, a big part of this is that Sona heals herself, and she has much more synergy with things like Athene's Unholy Grail and Ardent Censer. She's just better able to, like, maximize those items than Soraka is. Those items are pretty good on Soraka, but, like, Sona's ability to just put it on everyone constantly with her W, Ardent Censer, and just how much damage she puts out in a long fight that gets converted over to Athene's healing is much, much higher than Soraka is. So I do think that Soraka is good. She can be oppressive in the laning phase. I do think that, like, putting 3 points in Q is better than the Emax. Emax happened at a point in time where Aerie did a lot more damage, Scorch did a lot more damage, and Poke stuck a lot more to people. It doesn't do that anymore. Okay, so that was, you know, and I think that she, in general, I think she got nerfed at some point last year. But that, like, Battle Soraka where you get, like, 5 points in Equinox was in a very specific meta. I don't think it's that good right now. You might see some pros getting it. The thing about it is it does guarantee damage, which is nice. It's just like point, click, boom. You know, does 230 damage. And that is very good poke if they don't have sustain. But that is a tall order these days. There's going to be a lot of Namis floating around out there. There's going to be Sonas floating around out there. And if you're getting a lot of points in Equinox, that means you're not getting a lot of points in your Astral Infusion. So that means that they are going to destroy you in team fights. So this can be good for laning phase, but you're going to be a lot weaker in team fights. And the thing also about this is this Q not only does damage, first of all, it's spammable. So it's on a 5-second cooldown at a very cheap cost, and it does, like, literally the exact same damage, right? Like 70 to 230. 70 to 230. Literally the same damage at, like, 1/5 of the cooldown cost early on. Okay, so that right there should go ahead and grab your attention. And it costs less mana as well. But it also heals you. Okay, so it heals you for quite a bit. You know, heals you for 56, heals you for up to 88, but it has a 0.4 ratio on it. So it not only does damage, but it heals you, and it empowers your heal on your allies, right? So if we look at this, you know, total ally healed, then it ends up healing them for an additional 110 with up to a 50% AP ratio. That's like double your heal, or like 50% more heal, right? So your basic heal is only 200 with a 0.6. If you hit somebody with a Q in a team fight that's maxed out later, you're getting an extra 110 value on that over time. That's a lot. That's like plus 50% healing and shielding. So that's why I like getting Star Call more if you can hit it. If you can't hit Star Call, I don't think you should be playing Soraka. But That's why I like it. It's spammable, gives you more damage over time, heals yourself so that you can actually take trades. So if Nami hits you back when you hit her with Star Call, then you know, it's going to be more favorable for you. And it empowers your heal in the mid to late game. It also empowers your heal during the laning phase. If you need to heal an ally, hit a Star Call first, boom, 50% healing and shielding. So I recommend going 3 points in Star Call and then maxing out your Astral Infusion by level 10 and then finishing Star Call in Equinox last. You can use this as just kind of your point-click silence, which can be very good. Like, so this can be good against things like Nunu or Rammus. Those count as channeled abilities. So you can interrupt them. So that can be helpful. But yeah, I think that's the biggest thing that I see on Soraka is a lot of people still are doing this like old build of the Equinox Max, which was in a very specific time and place in a meta, whereas now there are other enchanters floating around. A lot of the more popular 80 carries are going to have lifesteal in their build, right? You think about Draven, you think about Lucian. They're going to have lifesteal somewhere in their build. Even Ashes, if they're still running Blade the Ruined King, are going to take that, which once again, they shouldn't be doing that, but they will. So, I don't know. That's how I would build her. So I think she can be effective. I think she's the least safe of all three. At least Sona has an AoE, like Sona has a more reliable way to speed herself up with her E. She heals herself, so she doesn't, you know, take as much damage in combat as Soraka does. And Sona has that AoE stun, which can protect her. Really, all Soraka has is the silence, which doesn't stop assassins from running at you. It can disrupt them in some cases, but it doesn't stop them, and you hurt yourself a lot whenever you're healing in team fights. And you have to get close. This is only 550 range. So you're going to be close to the action. You could potentially get picked off by an assassin. You could potentially take some collateral damage from AoE stuff, you know, Ziggs ult, Rumble ult, Kennen ult, Amumu ult, all of that stuff. So it's just, she's the most dangerous of all three, but she does have a lot of power. This is on a really low cooldown, 2 seconds, not including CDR, so you can really spam these heals late game. So it's very good if you can stand behind a reliable tank and just heal them up. She's virtually unstoppable. So Soraka does have high scaling. She is very powerful in the late game. Only Sona can match her in terms of team fighting, I think, as long as you're safe and you just get to sit there and do your thing. Another thing, however, is she's very vulnerable to grievous wounds because her entire kit is healing. That's it. You know, her wish is healing, her astral infusion is healing, everything's healing. And so if they have grievous wounds, it's going to cut all of your contributions to the game basically by 40%. Whereas on Sona, yes, it cuts Sona's healing, but a lot of her stuff is also a shield. Yes, it cuts Nami's healing, but a lot of her power is in her CC, right? She can still use bubbles. She can still use her wave. She can still use her slow off of her E. She still speeds a lot of people up. So she has a lot more utility than Soraka does. So I think Soraka is the hardest hit enchanter. Now, keep in mind, though, they did nerf Ignite a lot. You know, they did nerf Morellonomicon a lot in the last couple of patches. So that is very good. That means there's less grievous wounds in the game. But people can still get Executioners. They can still complete Morellonomicon if they want to. So it's still out there. It's still a risk, but it is diminishing. So Soraka has moved up the charts quite a bit. I just would not put her before Sona and Nami in terms of reliability, but she's certainly in the same conversation. She's just a little bit more risky with potentially more payout than Nami. And potential, I guess if you hit like all of your Qs every single time, she could potentially be more impressive than something like a Sona in the laning phase, but she's still going to be, you know, a really strong champion. So just Aerie, Mana Flow, Transcendence, Water Walking, then Bone Plating and Revitalize. So kind of the standard package here. You can take, you know, once again, Scorch if you think you're going to, your 80 carry is going to follow up with a lot of harassment in the laning phase. You can take Gathering Storm for later in the game. Just do not take Absolute Focus, which is what I recommended on Nami and Sona, because they heal themselves when they trade, but Soraka actually takes damage. So you can very quickly fall below and stay below 70% as Soraka during the laning phase. So you want to go with Transcendence instead, which is okay. And then same deal. Now, I like going Mikhail's on her early instead of Athene's. You can go Athene's, but having that extra healing is particularly relevant on Soraka because it's very difficult to heal yourself. You have to land Qs. And so having like that 300% or that conversion, that 100% conversion from mana regen to healing is super, super powerful on her. So if you go for something like Mikhail's plus Redemption, then that will end up giving you 300% extra, you know, health regen. And if you have something, you know, like 3 health regen per second like we did last time, you could end up getting something like 12 extra health regen per second if you have Mikhail's. Mikhail's also scales extremely well with Redemption, which is an item that you also want to get early. And so I think that Mikhail's is just a fantastic buy. Maybe it's not the first item that you get. I do think that getting a Chalice of Harmony is so helpful for the extra regen during the laning phase. You know, it's up to you how you want to deal with that. That does give you a really nice cleanse effect as well, so you can't be locked down as easily. And the 20% plus healing and shielding applies very, very well to Redemption. That's the thing about Athene's Unholy Grail. Like, it doesn't really do anything with Redemption. Like, it doesn't improve that burst healing that you get off of Redemption. However, with Soraka, Mikhail's gives 20% extra plus healing and shielding to the Redemption. And don't forget that Redemption triples your plus healing and shielding, right, as part of the ability. And so you're actually going to be getting 60% plus healing and shielding, right? People forget about that little line of text there, which is increased by 3 times your heal power. So that means your Redemption is going to hit like an absolute truck. So in a team fight, if you have Mikhail's, you drop a Redemption, and then you ult, you're going to be like healing everyone on your team for like 1,000 or something insane like that. So she's very, very good against AoE damage comps. So team fight comps, your Kennons, your Rumbles, that type of stuff. She's going to have, you know, the amount of healing you need to sort of burst heal through a lot of their burst damage. Yeah, and then this is it. So on most champions, I think that Athene's Unholy Grail is better. It's just specifically on Soraka because she wants that healing so much, and because she wants Redemption so much to complement the rest of her kit. I think that those two just go very, very well together. If you're using Mikhail's active properly. If you find yourself forgetting to cleanse people whenever they get CC'd, then don't get it. Like, you have to make good use of that cleanse. But that can be a lifesaver. Like, that can actually, like, 100% save somebody from getting killed. And that can turn around games, right? If your AD carry would have gotten picked off and they picked up Baron, maybe they win the game off of that. But if you can cleanse your AD carry, maybe that's the only way you could do it. Maybe healing wasn't enough, right? Maybe they got hit by a Morgana bind for 3 seconds and they're, like, definitely dead if you don't cleanse them. You know, maybe you save the game off of that. So Mikhail's is very, very powerful if used properly, but it takes more attention to detail. It takes more micro. Pro tip here, well, not a pro, but like, you know, a tip from me, is that you want to be thinking about what do you need to cleanse before the fight even starts. So don't find yourself like just with all these spells flying around and you're not sure what to do. Just think something like, okay, I know this Sejuani is going to try to throw her ult on my AD carry. If it hits them, I'm going to cleanse it. Or if Lux binds somebody and she's about to blow them up with her laser, I'm going to cleanse them. So just have like these conditions in your mind. If this happens, I'm cleansing, right? And then that way you're ready for it. You're looking for it. You're prepared. And you're not going to be like distracted or confused by all the spells flying around. Okay. Lulu is a rising star, I think. Now, I had predicted in the patch notes video that she was going to be really overpowered because of, you know, how Conqueror was worded, but it doesn't work out that way. You know, her hits off her passive do not trigger Conqueror, so that's not why she's up here, okay? So that does not work. What you saw in the patch notes after further testing, I hadn't actually tested. I was just reading it, you know, speculating it based on what I knew about Black Cleaver, based on what I knew about Ravenous Hunter. Doesn't work that way, okay? But the reason that she's up here is that we will still see some assassins. There will be more all-ins and kind of like counters being developed to enchanters out there. And I think that Lulu is pretty good against those, particularly Zed and Hecarim. I think that she's very good with Hecarim, first of all, because she speeds him up with her W a lot. And that when he goes in there, you can use your ultimate to... you know, give him that extra bit of survivability that he often lacks at 2 items, and, you know, hold people in place. So she's just very good with a lot of, like, bruiserish or, like, sort of squishy engaged champions. You know, like, someone like Olaf, she's also very good with. You can speed him up, you know, run him in there, ult him. So she adds a lot of extra survivability with her ultimate from a pretty good distance. We click on Lulu. So I think that's number one, is that I think she's good both with and against these type of diver champs, potentially. And she scales really well with champions that want a lot of attack speed. So champions like Jinx, really high scaling with Lulu. Kog'Maw obviously is historically extremely good with Lulu. Twitch is good with Lulu. Even someone like Vayne can be pretty good with Lulu because not only does she give that extra attack speed, but she gives a lot of movement speed. So someone like Vayne who really thrives on that mobility, being able to run around and position to dodge skill shots faster, you know, get in position to pin people into walls and things like that. So Vayne is very good with Lulu as well. And yeah, the range on this is huge. I mean, 900 is massive. And so that means that, you know, once that Hecarim runs in there, that Olaf runs in there, or whatever, Vi, you know, dives somebody really deep, you can hit this from far away without putting yourself at much risk. And it's on a very low cooldown, too, at 110. Another nice thing about this is it is an actual infusion of health. So it does work really well with tanks in that if they scale off of their health, it can be very useful. You also can't overheal this. So, like, with a heal, if you heal more than they have, you know, a lot of that's going to go to waste, right? But with this, you can even cast it on someone who's full health if you want to. And they'll still get the benefit out of it in a team fight, but you can use it for that knock-up and that CC that it applies. Because it slows people down for 7 seconds. That's a really long time in some of these fights to slow people by, you know, 30, 45, 60%. So that's going to give these champions like Maokai, like Shen, you know, all of these other champs, like the potential to actually stick to targets for 7 seconds. So it adds a lot of stickiness to people. It has that extra little bit of CC in there. And it gets around Ignite. You know, if someone is running Ignite or Grievous Wounds, then, you know, you're still going to be able to heal them for full. So if Zed is about to blow you up and he's got some grievous wounds, you know, you can use this to potentially heal yourself. So she's very, very good against champions like Zed and some of the other assassins out there. Decent shield. Now, the shield does fall off after 2.5 seconds, so that's important to keep in mind, but it doesn't decay, at least, like Janna's does. And it still has 210 base with a 0.6, so respectable. It also doubles his damage, so it's point-click damage, which is pretty decent, you know, even at early levels, like 80 damage for a point-click. 650 is pretty close, though. That's almost getting an auto range of most 80 carries. Caitlyn, it is auto range. But that is helpful. It does also grant True Sight, so people forget about this. So against champions like Vayne, I believe it still sees Vayne. It used to back in the day, but they're calling it True Sight. Yeah, it should look at invisibility. So if it's stuff that goes invisible, like Kha'Zix or Vayne or Akali, I'm not sure about Akali. But in theory, this used to... I haven't played Lulu consistently in a while since they've made some of these vision adjustments, but... it used to get vision of all of these types of things, and I think it still does to an extent. So, you know, very good against Twitch trying to get away, Vayne trying to roll around and do her thing, Kha'Zix trying to be invisible and run around. A lot of these champs that, you know, go invisible, Shaco, it should still be able to see all of them. So that's one little perk that a lot of people forget about. So, pretty decent. And then just remember, like, her on-hit damage is huge that she puts out. The AP, this doesn't look that big, right? But, you know, if we look at something like even at level 9, 63 on-hit damage that also has a 0.15 AP ratio, you'll usually have at least 100 AP on her if you get Athene's or Ardent Sensor. So, you know, that's going to give you somewhere in the neighborhood of 78 on-hit damage. And on-hit, I believe, is like 25 gold value. Say 42, so yeah, it is 25 gold value. So 25, what was that number that I said, times 78? It's basically like you're handing your 80 carry, if you put this on them in a fight, you're handing them like 2,000 gold off of her passive. Whoa. That's a lot. Now, it's a little bit different here because it's on attack and not on hit. So you don't get double triggers off of Gensu's with this. So that's important to note. So it's not like quite the same thing. But even if it's valued like a little bit less than that, like what, 1,500 gold, even 1,000 gold for that, it's still going to be very, very strong. It's a lot of damage. So people who have a lot of attack speed, people who are getting things like Gensu's or getting things like Blade of the Red King are usually going to have heavy attack speed somewhere in their kit or in their build. So that's going to be really powerful. And then, of course, you have Whimsy, right? So it gives a lot of extra attack speed itself, synergizes with her own passive. Gives people a lot of movement speed, allows them to kite, allows them to chase people down, and can be used as a 2.25 second stun effectively. So that is some big game. That's very, very strong. No other enchanter is going to have something that's that easy as point click. I will say the point click is a little deceptive against like melee champions that have high mobility, like Master Yi, for example, is very, very annoying to deal with as Lulu. In theory, Lulu can be good against him, but the problem is, and this is something a lot of people don't realize about this is actually a projectile. So when you buff an ally with it, it's not a projectile. It just happens to them. But when you try to throw it at an enemy, for some reason, it actually counts as a projectile. Why is this important? Because people can dodge it, whether intentionally or not. So, like, 650 range is pretty close to Master Yi's Alpha Strike range. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but if you try to throw this on Master Yi and he Alpha Strikes while this thing is midair, it gets canceled. It fizzles. Or if you try to throw this on somebody, like right when they're about to Zanya's Hourglass, or right when Vladimir's about to pull, or they're otherwise going to become untargetable, or maybe they're just about to flash a wall and you throw it and it's midair and they get over the wall before it hits them, it can be super frustrating. It also gets blocked by Yasuo's Wind Wall. It gets blocked by Braum's Wall. So that's a really annoying aspect of Whimsy that is not obvious at all. It doesn't even say it's a missile. It doesn't say it's missile speed here. It's pretty fast. It's difficult for people to outplay it like that, but they can. It doesn't even say it here, but I will 100% guarantee you that it is a projectile because I've seen it. I have been dodged by Master Yi. I have thrown it through a Yasuo Wind Wall before. It is very frustrating. So just keep that in mind when you're dealing with Whimsy. But basically what it comes down to with Lulu is she has a lot of really good CC and utility for like diver champs and hyper carries on your team that are going to be getting a lot of attack speed. And she's very good against assassins in ways that champions like Sona and like Nami just aren't. And so that's something that's nice. She is close range. Her shield is 650, so not as close as Sona or Soraka, but not as far as Nami. And she doesn't have a heal in her kit. So that's the biggest knock on her, is she doesn't scale very well with plus healing and shielding, because not only does she not have a like a spammable heal in her kit, but she also, like, this isn't actually a heal. So this is not modified by plus healing and shielding. It's not modified by revitalize, nothing. It's just flat health. So yes, it does get around ignite. Yes, it can overheal them to an extent. You can't waste any of it on a full health target, but it doesn't benefit from plus healing and shielding because it's an infusion of health. Okay, so that means she doesn't get as much benefit out of things like Redemption. She doesn't get as much benefit out of things like Ardent Censor, but she does still get full benefit out of Athene's. You know, she can still use Aerie. She still has a shield, but it makes it very difficult to trade as well against other enchanters, because when Nami's coming up and just smacking you with her wave, you know, over and over and over again, and she's healing and you're not, that can be rough. So she is good against things that also don't have a heal. So she's good against stuff like Janna. She's good against just some other champions in lane, like melee champions, Braum, Tom, that type of thing. But you just have to be a little bit careful. So she is deceptively weaker in the laning phase than a lot of some of these other more oppressive champions like Nami and Sona. But she can be very strong, and she is going to have a bigger game against assassins than some of them over time. And she has different kinds of utility. She's good with divers, you know, specifically Hecarim, who's going to be very popular on this patch probably. Olaf, who's still pretty good. And a lot of these tanks that can get peeled, she's very good with the tanks that do that. So like Malachi, she's good at running him in, helping him engage. She's good at helping Dr. Mundo stick to people with her ultimate. So I think she's going to be gaining a lot of extra real estate here just because of the types of champions that are coming back in. So she can't spam the heal on them as much as someone like a, you know, someone like a Sona or a Soraka. So she doesn't help tanks in that way, but she gives them the mobility and stickiness that they need to be able to be competitive on the backline and not get kited. So she does have a lot of really, really good utility. She's an interesting, kind of unique take on the Enchanter role. So yeah, I would actually probably change this over to Frostfang on her just because I think that Athene's is going to be very strong. She does actually have the option, if you want to go Zeke. So it's not amazing on her, but it's okay because she doesn't lose as much value by not having the plus healing and shielding. So, like, you would never want to go Zeke's on someone like Sona or Nami. But, like, on her, you can go Zeke's if you need to. You do have a low cooldown ult, and the person that you Zeke's will be able to stick. So, if you Zeke's... you could Zeke someone like an Olaf or a Hecarim or something and allow them, give them even more stickiness with your ult. But you could also, you know, just tie your Zeke's to your AD carry if you want to. Then you would have the Zeke's plus Ardent Sensor double on-hit combo, which Zeke's and Ardent do apply twice off of Gensu's Rage Blade. So she does have options there. She can go armor herself. She can be a little bit more defensive than some of the other champs to protect herself against stuff like a Zed. So she has more itemization options than some of the other enchanters, especially now that Rakan has kind of been nerfed into the dirt to some extent. Then she does become a little bit more valuable as an enchanter. You know, Rakan's not an exact enchanter, but he's someone that could build enchanter items and could also get armor. So she's someone who can potentially get armor. Okay, and then finally, Leona, and that's probably going to be it, and we'll just run through the other ones really quickly. I know I only got through 5 here. I probably spent a bit too long early on, but I just wanted to sort of clarify what I was talking about in the patch notes and talk about who this specifically applies to. So this is almost like patch notes 2.0 for the first 20 minutes of the video, but I just wanted to be accurate there. Okay, so Leona is naturally going to be seen as a counter to champions like Nami, Sona, Soraka, Lulu. She does have really nice engage, really high burst damage. It's very difficult to get away from her. Also, Thresh got nerfed on this patch, so we'll probably still see a lot of Thresh, but a little bit less than we had in the past, and so that can be really helpful. And then, yeah, just does a lot of damage. Still a super risky pick, though. If you don't get ahead early, you will get outscaled by these champions, but you can punish them. Particularly if you have something like a Draven, a Lucian, Jhin, Misfortune, some of these type of champs that do a lot of damage early, the Nami can be very good for busting people up. She has a very low cooldown ult. I think it's like 90 seconds, and it's going to be very difficult for these champions to dodge because they don't have a dash to get away from her. And, you know, like I said, Thresh got nerfed. Other counter picks like Janna have been nerfed over time. And so that does make Leona potentially a lot more appealing. That's a really long-range engage, too. So you might be seeing some more Leona. If you really like hard engage tanks, I think she's one of the better ones right now. I do still like Nautilus quite a bit, but he can't engage through minion waves. Yes, he does have a fat hitbox on his hook, but he can engage through minion waves, and he does not have as much burst damage early on. So I think that Nautilus potentially can be tankier than her and can have more utility in an extended like team fight, but I just think that she's going to be able to start snowballing and really punish those squishy enchanters a lot more than Nautilus will in the laning phase. So I think that they're going to have a harder time dealing with Leona than Nautilus. So I think that Leona could potentially become a lot more popular. She's already pretty popular, and I think she already has a pretty decent win rate, right? I mean, like 51.6 win rate. So I expect she's probably going to jump up a lot more on this patch. So I think that Leona is definitely going to be stronger against those type of champions. Although for me personally, as I've said before, she's too risky for my taste. If she gets camped by the jungler and you fall behind early, you're pretty worthless later on. You don't scale at all. So yeah, it just feels really, really bad if you are playing Leona and you're like, man, I really want to punish this Sona, and then, you know, the enemy, you try to go in a couple of times, the enemy jungler counter ganks you, you die, then all of a sudden, you know, it's in the mid game, and Sona's got her Athenes plus Ardent, you know, around like 20 minutes, and you're just sitting there with your Zeeks and like, you know, part of a Knight's Vow, and you're like, well, I guess we lose, pretty much. It's not quite that bleak. You can still make some plays and maybe pick some people off, but it gets increasingly more difficult over time. So, yeah, pretty good. You know, Nami can still do all right against her. Nami can still bubble and, like, disengage some of her stuff later on. Still okay. Lulu, it's difficult to go into Lulu, too, once she hits level 6, but you can punish her pre-6 because she can just ult the person you go on and then polymorph the AD carry. So, you know, she's best used against things like Soraka and Sona, and she's okay against Nami and Lulu to a point, but she definitely does start to fall off, you know, after a while, so you got to be careful with that. Okay, last few picks here. Thresh, still going to be strong. you know, if you're a good Thresh player, but you have to be good now. You know, you're going to, if you miss those hooks, they're going to have a much larger window to punish you. You're going to run out of mana a lot faster. You're going to get outscaled hard at 2 or 3 items. Enchanters are getting a lot stronger. I think you have a much worse time against tanks if you're Thresh. You know, if you're trying to, like, weave a hook in through Nunu and Dr. Mundo, you know, when you're trying to siege, that's going to be a lot worse. It's really hard to hit champions like Ezreal, like Lucian, some of those mobile champions who are still going to be very, very popular on this patch. Vayne. Those are probably 3 of the most popular champs, if not the 3 most popular champs. And so it's very, very hard to hit hooks on those champs. Yes, it is good if you can, you know, get those hooks, especially early on the Sona, on the Nami, that type of thing. But once again, if they get to 2 or 3 items, kind of like Leona, even if you get the hook on a squishy, you may not be able to kill them because they're going to drop redemption and then they're going to spam all of their abilities. And unless you can kill them in 2.5 seconds, you know, through all of those shields, you're not going to kill them. And if you take that hook in, you're going to die. So I think it's tough. I think that Thresh is definitely going to fall down a little bit on this patch. He already wasn't at like a super high win rate. He's pretty good. He's pretty good for a tank, though. 52.5 for a champion that's that high of a skill cap, where there's going to be a lot of bad Thresh players out there. And for that high of a pick rate, that is really, really high. So he's still going to be, you know, pretty strong, pretty respectable. I just bumped him out of Tier 1 into Tier 2 because he's hard to play. There's a lot of counterplay to him, and I think that he loses to enchanters at 3 items most of the time, sometimes at 2 items. So Janna's another one. She can be very good if you get out of the laning phase, but she has, like, nothing in the laning phase hardly. You know, yes, you can put 3 points in W and kind of spam it on people, and that can be useful, but she's kind of got Lulu syndrome in the sense that, you know, she doesn't have a heal, right? She has a really dinky shield, which is actually weaker than Lulu's because it decays over time. Lulu at least has a 10-second shield in the laning phase that can also double his damage. So Lulu can actually put out decent damage. If you E, then Q somebody in auto, like, that's half their health bar, right? Janna can spam her W, which is nice, but she still, if you are leveling that up, you're not leveling up your shield. And so, you know, if you have a 20-second or, like, an 18-second cooldown on your shield until level 7, if you choose to get 3 points of W in lane, that's a problem. You know, you're going to have, like, very, very limited protection for people. Like, you're just going to have your tornado and your ult. But if they get on you or the AD carry, you're dead. So she's okay. She's still solid. If you get out of the laning phase, if you put 3 points in W in the laning phase and then max out shield after that, if you can survive to level 10, you know, get a couple of items, get yourself a, you know, a redemption plus either an Ardent Censer or an Athene's or something like that, she can be good. Now, another issue, though, is she's not a great user of Athene's. She doesn't put out a lot of damage in the mid-game. You know, Nami has the wave that bounces around. She has her ult, her bubble. All of these things do, like, pretty decent AoE damage in fights. And then, of course, Sona's crazy with all of that. But even Soraka can start hitting multiple people with star calls and things and get, like, some damage for Athene's if you want to do that instead of Mikhail's. But Lulu can use her Q and hit multiple targets in fights to kind of buff up Athene's a little bit. Janna really doesn't have anything like that. She's got her tornado, but you don't really want to be, like, using that to try to throw down damage, and it has a pretty long cooldown. Doesn't do a lot of damage most of the time because you're going to be insta-casting it, and you're only going to have 1 point in it for most of the game. So, like, all that you've got are your auto attacks and your W, which are not going to be churning out, like, that much damage in team fights. So she's not that great with Athene's. She is pretty good with Ardent Censer. She's not amazing with Ardent Censer, actually. Like, she's okay, but she can only put it on one person at a time. So, like, a lot of these other champs have multiple ways to put it on people. Like, your Nami wave can bounce around on people. You can apply it by putting an E on somebody with Nami to give them the airy. That gives them Ardent Censer, and then you can use your W in, like, the melee line to bounce that around. So you can comfortably put Ardent on, like, 3 or 4 people on your team, right? Whereas with Janna, you have to, like, your shield is your only thing that targets your allies, where you can put Ardent on them. You can use your ult, and it'll go on to somebody else, but it's not as reliable or as repeatable in an extended fight. Like your W, you can't target allies. You can't target allies with your Q. So she doesn't synergize as well with Ares. She doesn't synergize with Ardent Censor or Athene's as well as some of the other top picks. She's still all right with those things. She can use Mikhail's pretty well. So she's still all right. You know, she's not bad. She's going to have a good win percentage. You know, overall 52.4. So she's still going to be on the strong side. You just have to survive the laning phase. And then Blitzcrank, sort of similar to Leona, just a lot less reliable. Leona's engage is actually quite reliable against these types of champions that don't have a lot of flashes and dashes. So Leona's engage is a bit more reliable, but if you're constantly landing those blitz hooks, you know, you can win the whole game by yourself with Blitzcrank. But you better hit those hooks because you have nothing else in your kit if you don't hit the hooks, basically. So if you're good at hitting the hooks, you know, he can be all the way up in tier 1, but if you're only hitting like 30% of them, probably going to be a lot lower. So a lot of this depends on how much people punish you for missing hooks. So at lower elo, if you miss a hook, people are still going to be scared of you. They're not going to step up and punish you. Once you start getting into like gold and higher, people are going to be like, oh, Blitz missed his hook. I'm Nami. I'm going to run up and beat the crap out of him for, you know, 18 seconds while it's on cooldown, right? And so it depends on how much people punish you for missing hooks. But, you know, he can be okay. Morgana could be as like higher in tier 2, but I think that she gets trashed by the enchanters. However, she's very good against Leona and Thresh. So she's a very counter pick type of champion. Black Shield is very, very useful on hyperscaling champs like Vayne, like Jinx. And a big part of that is, you know, they can't CC you, especially if damage is lowering, if it's going to be, if they're not going to break your shield as easily. You know, if it's just a bunch of tanks that aren't going to have a bunch of AP damage, then that Black Shield can stay up for the full duration, and they're not going to be able to do anything to stop that Jinx from just beating down your team, or that Vayne from doing whatever she wants, or Master Yi from running through and shredding up your team, or the Katarina, you know, from obliterating your team. So that Black Shield has a whole lot of utility, especially in a tank meta, that a lot of people are relying on CC to deal with your heavy threats because they don't have the burst damage to do it. So that can be useful. That bind is very good for peeling. You know, it's hard to hit at max range because it's so slow, but if they're running at you, fairly easy to hit. Your ultimate is another, you know, good peeling tool that you have in your kit. Your W is kind of worthless. Like, you can push early with it, but I really wish they gave her grounding on that and did something else to rebalance the rest of her kit, like maybe lower the CC on her Q, just to give her one more piece of, you know, interaction. But I guess maybe they thought it was going to be too strong. So she's a pretty good counter pick, but I wouldn't first pick her. I think she can get trashed by the enchanters. She's just going to get outscaled a lot of times in fights. You know, if you're staring down, you know, a Jinx with a Nami backing her up, or a Sona backing her up or something, and you've got like Morgana Ezreal, there's not a lot you're going to be able to do about that. You know, just pray it doesn't go to like 30 minutes. But anyways, she can be good. Zyra can still be really oppressive if you want to use her. Her damage is down a lot after the plant nerfs. You know, ignite damage is down. Enchanters are everywhere. They have so much healing and shielding. A lot of the top 80 carries are taking lifesteal. They can take Doran's shield against you comfortably. They can get things like Phantom Dancer second, which is going to give them another huge shield to help them avoid a lot of your damage if they have to. It's getting rough out there for Zyra. You better absolutely slam the laning phase. Like, you better get multiple kills and take like multiple plates and just like end the game by like 20 to 25 minutes, because it's really not going in your favor, because there's a lot less damage from other roles as well. So now if you land that in a team fight, that Zyra ult, well, now Yasuo is doing a lot less damage, right? Because he doesn't have Conqueror anymore. Now, you know, just some of these other champions that are getting their damage nerfed are doing less over time. And so it's, you know, more likely that people are going to survive long enough for that redemption to hit them. If you engage into a team fight, you know, Sona shield plus redemption, if you don't kill them in that one rotation, it's done. You're pretty much worthless throughout the rest of the fight. So very, very difficult, you know, once the enchanters get to 2 items as Zyra. And I've played a lot of Zyra in the day, okay, especially into enchanters, and it is a very difficult matchup in metas where there's not a lot of damage going around, or where the damage is on the decline, which is the kind of meta we've been shifting into for the last 3 or 4 patches. Ever since really the nerf to Dark Harvest, that's kind of been the trend, because so many people were crying about too much damage in the meta. And finally, Brand, Pike, Rakan. These champions are okay. You know, Bran is just a worse version of Zyra, but if you feel more comfortable on him, if you like playing him, if you're just, you know, you just can't get the Zyra plants down, or you just really like having that, like, single target burst, Bran can be a little bit better. Pike is just a worse version of Thresh most of the time. His items require a lot more gold. He doesn't have as much peel. You know, he doesn't have his flay. His ultimate doesn't have a lot of utility. Like, basically you kill steal and get a little bit more gold a lot of the time. But it really doesn't have a lot of team utility to it other than generating extra gold if you're already ahead. Rakan can still be okay. I still pick him sometimes, you know, maybe into like things like Zed. I think he can be really good if you need an armor user who can also peel and is not going to get blown up. He can be good, but he's also going to get trashed by these like aggressive enchanters in the laning phase. Also has a hard time against Leona and Thresh. So against like the CC champs and the enchanters, he's kind of starting to have a bit of a hard time. So they might buff him on the next patch. We'll see. But right now, he's in a pretty bad spot. Alistar, good in pro play. Same thing with Braum, good in pro play. Not great in solo queue. Just has virtually no scaling in his kit. Requires coordination with your team to really work. And it's just going to get busted up by enchanters. Now, he can be a huge threat if you have something like a Draven or a Jhin and you stand on the front line and you're actually really aggressive with him and, you know, your AD carry is on board with that. They're helping you out. But if your AD carry, if you're Caitlyn standing 650 range off of the wave, just auto-attacking, last hitting in the background, and you're trying to position far up ahead, you know, Nami's just going to take you down. Because, you know, your AD carry may not be in a position to follow up, you know, if you try to hard engage. So I think that high-level play with aggressive AD carries and people that are, like, with the program of, like, being aggressive, you know, making plays in the laning phase, he can be very good, but, you know, gold and lower, even platinum and lower, I would not recommend running the peeler tanks. I mean, I guess Alistar is a very good engage. He's not peeler. He's also engaged, but just the lack of scaling, I think is pretty rough on him. Then Tahm Kench, Fiddle, Ornn, Jarvan. I knocked Fiddle down here a little bit just because it is so hard to poke through the Enchanter's sustain in the laning phase, and sort of similar to Zyra and Brand, if the Enchanter gets to 2 or 3 items, you're in trouble. So you're in an even weaker spot than Zyra and Brand because you don't have as good of an all-in pre-6. You're just kind of all-poke before then, whereas Zyra and Brand can actually kill you pre-6. And then you have that moment when you hit 6 before they have a couple of items where you can actually kill them. If you get really good ults off, you can snowball the game hard. But you're going to have like maybe between like 10 minutes to 20 minutes into the game, you're going to have this small window where you need to completely take over the game. You need to get multiple kills, secure objectives. You're just like, it's a really small like window, you know, really small tire in the backyard you're trying to throw that football through, you know, to really have a good win condition with Fiddlesticks. So a little too risky for my taste, but he can still work if you get ahead, if you are good on him. He does have a lot of nice CC against assassins like a Zed. He can take things like Hourglass, which is also good against Zed. So he does have some strong options out there, but if you do fall behind and they start getting vision all over the place in your jungle, it's going to be lights out. It's going to be very, very difficult to deal with that. And then Jarvan and Veigar are cute, kind of like niche boutique picks, but I really don't think that they're going to be that great on this patch. They have very limited. Veigar does scale, but his items are expensive, and he's very exploitable for all-in champs. I mean, maybe. I mean, Veigar can be good with Vayne if Vayne pins him into the wall. Potentially you can outscale someone like a Soraka if you just flat out one-shot people late game before they have any healing. Maybe that is a good strategy. You know, if they're going to give you a passive laning phase, if they're not going to be that aggressive with you. So at lower elos, that's why he's a lot better because, you know, the Soraka might just sit there and AFK in a bush instead of constantly walk up and Q and auto-attack you. So maybe against enchanters that are just kind of chilling, you know, AFKing in bushes and just letting you farm, yeah, Veigar could be pretty good. He does have a nice AoE stun, especially if people stop playing like Ezreal as much, or if you want to ban out Ezreal. You know, it can be pretty easy to catch people in those cages. So yeah, I mean, I could definitely see some uses where Veigar could be good, but he is very risky as well. Jarvan, I mean, maybe sometimes, but anyways, we're out of time. That's it. Hour and 30, can't go much longer than that. So anyways, thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope I was able to explain, you know, why each of these champions are good and sort of what the differences are between them. You know, I think sometimes they all just get lumped together. It's like it's the enchanters, but each one of them is kind of good in slightly different situations. And then I just wanted to clarify as well, like, how Conqueror actually works, how it's going to affect the meta, and how that ties into the specific Rise of Enchanters and why I chose to order them in this way. But anyways, that's going to be it. If you enjoy the content, be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see everybody next time. Have a great day.